At 17, Maya learned that freedom didn't taste like independence. It tasted like the salt of her own tears and the cold metal of a bus stop bench at 3 a.m. She had traded her bedroom for a backpack and her parents' rules for a life on the run. But as her waistband tightened and her options vanished, she realized the bridge she'd burned was the only thing that could save her. Welcome to Threads of Grace Stories. You are in for a treat. Let's get started. The fluorescent lights of Jefferson High didn't flicker, but to Maya, they felt like strobe lights timing the beat of her panic. At 17, the weight she carried wasn't in her backpack, which held only a single notebook and a crusty hoodie, but in the tightening of her waistband and the hollow ache in her stomach. For 3 weeks, Maya had been living out of a transition shelter 3 bus transfers away. For 2 weeks before that, she had slept in the backseat of a car belonging to a friend, who disappeared the moment she stopped having gas money to contribute. What a friend that was, but she seemed to be noticing that her circle had been full of a lot of half-time friends. Maya's descent hadn't been a sudden cliff drop. It was a series of small ego-driven pivots. It started with the thrill of rebellion, skipping chemistry to hang out with a crowd that made her feel seen, in ways her high-achieving parents never did. Then came the lies, the missed curfews, and finally, the relationship with a boy named Jax who promised her a life of freedom from her parents' expectations. When her mother found the vape pens and the failing report card, the ensuing argument ended with Maya shouting that she hated them and slamming the door. She thought she was walking toward independence. She felt like she was walking towards no one ever being able to tell her what to do again. She felt like she was walking towards freedom. But what she didn't realize was she walking into an abyss. Now at 5 months pregnant and visibly showing despite her oversized sweatshirt, the freedom felt a lot like a slow-motion disaster. Homelessness in high school is a ghost's existence. Maya moved through the hallways like a phantom. She used the gym showers before first period, hoping the scent of industrial soap would mask the fact that she'd spent the night in a room with 12 strangers. The hunger was the worst part. Not just the physical craving for food, but the nutritional depletion that made her bones feel like glass. She sat in the back of English, a class she used to love, staring at the board as the teacher discussed the scarlet letter. The irony wasn't lost on her. She didn't have a stitch to her chest, but she felt the heat of 1,000 invisible eyes roaming her growing frame, perusing her worn clothes, and frowning at her ill-styled hair. She had spent the majority of her life convinced that her parents, Sarah and David, were the villains. They were controlling, stifling, and judgmental. Maya adjusted her position on the splintered wooden bench, wincing as a sharp cramp bloomed in her lower back. Her reflection in a nearby puddle was unrecognizable. The girl who used to spend 40 minutes on her eyeliner was gone, replaced by a shadow with sallow skin and hair matted at the nape from sleeping against bus windows. For months, her anger had been her only fuel. She had nurtured it like a cold fire, warming herself on the memory of her father's face when she told him he was smothering her soul, just because he asked for her phone at 10 p.m. She had replayed her mother's judgmental sighs until they sounded like sirens of oppression. In her mind, Sarah and David were the jailers of a suburban prison, and her escape had been a heroic liberation. But as she sat on a park bench one Tuesday afternoon after skipping her last 2 periods, watching a mother push a stroller, the reality hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was about to be that mother. And she had nothing. No crib, no insurance, no safety, and most devastatingly, no love to pass down because she was running on empty. The woman wasn't doing anything extraordinary. She was simply leaning over a lime green stroller, adjusting a sunshade and handing a soft, knitted elephant to the infant inside. She looked tired, but she looked present. She had a diaper bag stocked with contingencies, bottles, wipes, extra onesies, and a home to return to where the heat worked and the doors locked from the inside. Maya looked down at her own hands. They were trembling. The freedom she had fought for had resulted in a backpack containing a half-eaten sleeve of crackers and a pair of damp socks. She realized with a sickening jolt that she wasn't independent. She was just untethered. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was about to bring a life into this vacuum. She thought of the sins she'd been so proud of, the cleverness of her lies, the thrill of the theft, the adrenaline of the midnight run. They felt like ash in her mouth now. She had nothing to offer this child but her own exhaustion and a legacy of running away. She wasn't just broke, she was spiritually bankrupt. She had spent all her emotional currency on spite, and now, when she needed love to pass down to the flickering life inside her, she found the vault was empty. She didn't just need a crib or insurance. She needed the very thing she had spent a year spitting on: a family. The mother with the stroller began to walk away, the wheels clicking softly on the pavement. Maya watched her go until she was just a speck in the distance, then she stood up. Her legs felt heavy, but for the first time in months, her direction was clear. The pride that had been her armor was now just a weight she couldn't afford to carry anymore. The walk to her childhood home took 4 hours. Her feet throbbed, and the mild Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been having made her stop every few blocks to breathe through the tightness. As she turned the corner onto her street, the neighborhood looked offensively normal. The lawns were manicured, the porch lights were warm and inviting. Felt like a different planet. She stood at the edge of her driveway for a long time, watching the silhouette of her father in the kitchen window. He looked older and worn. And she knew that she too was far from Daddy's little girl. He felt the baby kick, a sharp, insistent jab. It's now or never, she thought. She didn't knock. She couldn't find the strength to hit the wood. She simply collapsed onto the top step and sobbed. The sound was raw, the kind of noise that comes from someone who has reached the absolute end of themselves. She sat on the top step, her knees pulled as close to her chest as her stomach would allow, her forehead resting on the peeling white paint of the porch railing. She was a wreck of a girl, a collection of shivering limbs and stained fabric, shaking so violently that the wood beneath her seemed to vibrate. The deadbolt turned with a heavy, familiar thud. It was a sound she had heard 1,000 times in a previous life, usually followed by her slipping out the door or sneaking back in. Now it sounded like the gates of a sanctuary. The door swung open, throwing a long rectangular slice of warm amber light across the dark porch. Maya. The name was barely a breath. Sarah stood in the entryway, clutching the collar of her sweater, her face frozen in a mask of agonizing disbelief. She looked at the girl on her steps not as a rebellious runaway or a disappointment, but as a miracle she was afraid to touch. Her voice was a terrified whisper, thin and trembling, as if speaking too loudly might cause the vision to dissolve back into the night. Maya looked up. The porch light hit her full in the face, revealing the hollowed-out circles under her eyes and the tear-streaked grime that mapped the exhaustion of her journey. She looked like a ghost that had forgotten how to haunt. "Mom," Maya choked out, the word breaking into 2 jagged pieces. "I'm so cold. I'm so sorry." In that moment, the months of silence, the police reports, the sleepless nights, and the bitter arguments evaporated. Sarah didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't demand to know where she'd been. The sight of her daughter's trembling hands and the unmistakable curve of her pregnancy hit Sarah with the force of a tidal wave. Sarah's legs simply gave way. She fell to her knees on the hard wood of the porch, reaching out with frantic, searching hands to pull Maya into her lap. She gathered the girl's head against her shoulder, burying her face in Maya's tangled, unwashed hair. "You're here," Sarah sobbed, her tears wetting Maya's neck. "You're home. Oh, thank God you're finally home." From the hallway, the heavy footsteps of her father approached, stopping abruptly at the threshold. Maya looked up through a blur of salt and saw David standing there. His shoulders, usually so square and resolute, slumped as he took in the scene. He didn't say a word. He simply sank down beside them, his large arms wrapping around both his wife and his daughter, anchoring them all to the floor as the porch light hummed above them, a halo for a homecoming that had seemed impossible only an hour before. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and floor wax, the smell of safety. David brought a blanket, his hands shaking as he tucked it around her. They didn't yell. They didn't demand explanations. They just watched her eat a bowl of soup with a desperation that broke their hearts. Finally, the silence became too heavy. "I ruined everything," Maya whispered, her eyes fixed on the table. "I lied to you about where I was. I stole money from your dresser before I left. I let people convince me that you were the enemies. And I'm pregnant. I'm so sorry. I've been so stupid." She waited for the lecture. She waited for the "I told you so." She even expected them to tell her she couldn't stay. Instead, David reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm and grounded. "Maya, we've spent every night for months looking for you. We didn't care about the money or the grades. We just wanted our daughter back." "I have nothing to give you back," she choked out. "I'm a mess." Redemption isn't something you earn by being perfect, Sarah said, moving to sit beside her. It's what happens when you come home and let us help you carry the load. You made mistakes, honey. Big ones. But they don't outweigh the fact that you're ours. The months that followed weren't easy. There were doctor's appointments to catch up on, GD tutors to meet with, and long, difficult conversations about boundaries and trust. The poor choices of her past still had consequences. She wouldn't graduate with her class, and the physical toll of her homelessness required months of recovery. But for the first time in a year, Maya wasn't running. The nursery was set up in her old bedroom. The walls, once covered in posters of bands she didn't even like anymore, were now a soft, calm blue. As Maya sat in the rocking chair her father had restored, she realized that grace wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a future on top of the ruins. She had left the house as a girl trying to prove she didn't need anyone. She had returned as a woman-to-be who knew that the greatest strength lay in the humility to say, "I can't do this alone." As the sun set over the quiet suburban street, Maya finally felt the weight lift. She was home. She was forgiven. And for the first time she was ready. Thank you for listening. Maya's story mirrors the ancient heartbeat of the parable of the prodigal son, proving that no matter how far a person wanders into the distant country of their own poor choices, the road home is paved with a grace. Maya's pursuit of a hollow freedom led her to a state of physical and spiritual starvation. Her return was not prompted by a sudden burst of perfection, but by the humility of brokenness. The core moral shared by both stories is that true redemption is found in the courage to confess and the humility to return. Ultimately, Maya's journey teaches us that our sins, our pride, our rebellion, and our mistakes do not define our destination unless we allow them to keep us in exile. Redemption is always available to those who are willing to turn back toward the light. What say you? How far is too far? Share your comment below. I look forward to reading them.